Hi, everyone. Hey, Ross.
Hey there, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm so glad this worked so far.
I know. I know.
What a
I
relief, right?
I know. Especially when things break down because of technology and we're trying to figure all this out, but it's working out so far. I'm gonna
Right.
wait a few seconds just for people to join and then we'll get started. Also, I think I'm gonna lower this just a little bit because there you go. Now I'm not just a floating head. So, um, okay. I guess we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to introduce just kind of what we're going to do today, and then I'll introduce you, and then we'll get right to it. How about
Okay,
that? Okay,
sounds good.
cool. So far we have a couple of people join, 46 people. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Elvia Limón. I'm the engagement producer here at the Texas Tribune. And welcome to our first episode of our ongoing Instagram live series. We're going to be recapping the highlights from the Texas Legislature twice a month. I'll be sitting down with Texas Tribune reporters or special guests to just break down what's going on in the legislative session this year. We'll dive into how the legislature works, how social distancing measures will likely disrupt inner workings of the Texas Capitol, and we'll discuss the impact of COVID-19 on the state's budget, among other things. But before we begin, I want to give a special thanks to Lone Star College and DoorDash for supporting this event. And if you haven't already, make sure to follow us at Texas_Tribune here on Instagram and at Texas Tribune on Twitter and Facebook. And now on to what happened this week. I'm joined here today by Ross Ramsey, and I'm going to introduce you, Ross, in case nobody knows who you are, but they should know who you are.
Read the short one. The long one sounds like an obituary.
Yeah. Okay. This one's short. Ross is the executive editor and co-founder of the Texas Tribune, where he writes regular columns on politics, government, and public policy. So, Ross, this is my first session. I'm writing the brief, and I'm learning as I go, and I'm sure a lot of people joining us today are the same way. Different levels of expertise when it comes to the legislative session. So can you just kind of go over just what are some of the things that Texans should know when it comes to how it's made up? You know, who are the key players in the Texas Legislature?
This is number 16 for me. Some kind of, it's like my car broke down on the side of the road and I've never left town. The Texas Legislature meets for 140 days every 2 years. That's in the state constitution. It's 20 weeks long. And, the general scheme of things is there are 31 members in the Senate, 150 members in the House. There's a governor in the middle. And there are a bunch of state agencies over to the side. Kind of during the legislative session, the state agencies kind of keep their heads down collectively and let the legislators do their work. They generally have 6,000 or 7,000 pieces of legislation filed. Some of that's duplicative. You file a bill and I file the same bill just so we both have our names on it, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But in a normal session, by the time they get to the end, they've only passed probably 20 or 22% of those bills. So in a normal session, 6,000 or 7,000 bills, and they'll pass 1,600 or 1,800 of them, which is still a ton of legislation. There's some big, giant legislation that has to pass. The biggest example of that is a state budget. It's a really thick document. It's a ton of pages. Back when we used pages, it makes your iPad feel heavier. But it's basically all of the state's spending, which is basically all of the state's policy spelled out in one big document. You have to read it in math instead of in English, but you can see that they put this much money into this university or that much money into this program. And that tells you a little bit about, or it tells you quite a bit really about how the state government's going to work over the next 2 years. So that's a big thing they have to do. Another big one they have to do this time, every 10 years we get a new census. Every time we get a new census and new counts of the people that are in the legislature or in each legislative district, we have to fiddle around. So if you and I are both senators and your district's grown very quickly and mine maybe has shrunk, we have to kind of re-equalize those things. move some voters from one district to another so that all the districts are the same size. That very quickly becomes very political. If I'm drawing a district for myself, I would rather have the people that are most likely to run against me in somebody else's district. And you'll see sometimes that a map will go down a line, down a street, go over and pick out a house and come all the way down the rest of the line. In fact, a lawsuit about something just like that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court a few years ago, and the court said, yeah, you can do whatever you want. So it's all kind of political hijinks in it. But what's going to happen first is that the Congress will get the total number of people in the U.S. They'll divide that by 435, the number of people in Congress, and then they'll apportion those to the states. Texas now has 36 members in Congress, plus 2 senators. The chances are, based on early estimates, that we'll have 39 seats, so we'll get 3 more. Then they'll flip it to the states. The states will start drawing. The Texas Legislature has to do new maps for Congress, for the Senate, for the House, and for the State Board of Education. So those are 2 big things this legislature has to do. And then they have all the things that various members want to do or want to stop. It just depends on who you are and where you sit and where you stand on a particular issue. But those are going to include all of the things that you've been hearing about and talking about, probably for the last 2 years. There's a bunch of election law that needs to be sorted out. Different people have much different ideas about how it ought to be sorted out. Some would like it to be easier to vote for everybody. Some would like to make it more secure to vote for everybody. Some are in the middle. There's going to be a lot of conversation about civil justice, about racial justice, about policing procedures and funding and those kinds of things. We'll probably get a little bit of conversation about climate change. All of the things you've been hearing about for the last year, where you sort of in your mind thought, why doesn't somebody do something about that? That's what the Texas Legislature is here to do.
So a lot of that stuff, even though I know it'll directly impact me, it still seems kind of far away or distance from myself. All of this is going on in the Capitol. So can you give me a couple of examples of like some of the things that have already happened that are impacting us now, that the Texas Legislature worked on during the 2019 session or other sessions?
Yeah, there's a million things where you don't necessarily see what government's doing. On a local basis, you turn the faucet in the morning to brush your teeth and clean water comes out. That's all because of regulations and government stuff. You drive to work on a road that was built by the government. There's all of those kinds of things. And then there are things that, you just kind of take for granted now. You have to wear a seatbelt. That was a big fight in the legislature a couple of decades ago. You can't drink while you drive, which for someone my age, you used to be able to drive down the road with a beer in your hand, which, at the time seemed civilized. It seems really phenomenally stupid now. But there are a lot of things. There are a lot of things like that. There are things that, sometimes the legislature does things that are of particular interest to the public, either because there's a crisis and they need something done. School finance was a big thing, a big, giant, boring, sort of hard to get your head around thing in the 2019 session. But what it meant was that the state was putting more money into public schools and that it was relying less on high property taxes, or promising to rely less on high property taxes and maybe give people a break there. So, some of the things feel really connected. Am I going to be able to, is marijuana going to be legal in Texas? It's not yet. That's something the legislature might look at. Are casinos legal in Texas? Not yet. You can go to a horse race. You can go to a dog race. You can go to the bingo hall. Or you could play lottery, but you can't do the gambling thing yet. Lots of things like that. But then lots of things that are sort of indirect but will affect your life in bigger ways. Am I fairly represented in Austin and Washington? That's what redistricting is about. It's a scale.
So you mentioned the just casinos and marijuana. So are those some of the hot topics that are going to come up this session? Or, what are some other things that you have been seeing, or any bills that you've been seeing that you think are going to be a hot topic?
I think the legislation that's, some of it's referred to as the George Floyd Act. There's a particular piece of legislation that's filed that actually has that name. There's a lot of legislation around how police operate whether police departments are being relied on to do things that they shouldn't do. There's been a long-held a line that you hear a lot in Harris County, where Houston is that the largest mental health facility in the state of Texas is the Harris County Jail. And maybe that's not a policing problem. Maybe that's a mental health problem. Maybe we should spend some more money on something other than having patrol officers dealing with people who might be better off dealing with somebody else. There's a lot of questions like that. There's a lot of questions about after the George Floyd killing and similar incidents, how police behave, what police who see something like that are obligated to do. These are all things that you can address to a great extent in law and in policy, and I would expect the legislature to do that. They're going to have a big conversation about it. There's also a big push that, it's not necessarily two sides to this thing, but another aspect of this is that a lot of legislators feel like police are unfairly being attacked right now, and that somebody needs to take their side of the argument and take their side of this debate. You'll see that the governor proposed recently taking control of at least part of the policing in Austin, for example. A couple of square miles around the Capitol, taking that away, and told a group last night in Austin that he would like to ask the legislature to grab some of Austin's sales tax money, and instead of sending it from the state to Austin, instead send it to the state to pay for the policing Abbott wants the state to do in Austin's place. There's a big fight there. That's going to be a big argument, not only between Austin and the governor, but between mayors and county judges and city councils and county commissioners' courts about, hold on, wait a minute, this is where state government starts and stops. Here's where local government starts and stops. I expect that to be a big issue. And it all goes back to the conversation that was rekindled when George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis police custody last June. So, that's a big one. I expect a lot of stuff around COVID. We're writing right now, as you know, a lot about who's in line for vaccinations and where are the vaccinations coming from and how's this big confusing mess going. And I'm a little bit optimistic about that. I think that'll sort out relatively quickly as we get more vaccinations available. But I think we're going to have another conversation right after this one about, do we have enough people vaccinated? Or is everybody who really we would like, right now the question is everybody getting a vaccination who wants one? Pretty soon it's going to be, is everyone getting a vaccination who needs one in order to get the kind of herd immunity that we're after here? So, there's going to be a vaxxer, anti-vaxxer fight, whether you like those terms or not. I mean, some people are really, really opposed to vaccinations. Some people are really for them. We've seen that fight before. In fact, there was a small group at the Capitol on opening day who were opposed to vaccinations. A lot of these really contentious bills are going to come out of stuff like that. And then there'll be some hot spots, like you mentioned. If we have a conversation on the floor of the House about weed in Texas, that's going to be, maybe it'll be informative. I think it'll be interesting to watch. Some very conservative states have made marijuana legal. Federal law still does not. So it's weird. We have this drug that's legal in a bunch of states, but you can't, having sold it, put your money in a nationally insured bank. So there's a lot of weird stuff that the regulators at the state and federal level have to address.
So I guess going back to, you mentioned opening day and how, this was the first week of it. What happened this week? What did they talk about this week? And are they going to meet next week, or when's the next time they're going to meet?
Yeah, the beginning of a session is always really, really slow. And it seems like they're not doing anything. And then the end of a session is always berserk, and you feel like they're doing too much at once. It's just the way the thing flows. It flows a little differently now. So they came in on Tuesday. That was their first day. Everybody takes the oath. You won the election, take the oath. I swear I'll uphold the state constitution, yada, yada, yada. That's the day ordinarily the families would visit, and you'd sit there with your kids or your grandkids or whatever at your fancy state desk and take pictures. That was a little subdued this year. And then they go to their own rules. They have to, they call it organizing the House and organizing the Senate. It's basically the rules that they're going to abide by in-house while they're in session. One of the things they did in the House was they elected Dade Phelan, the new House Speaker, to replace Dennis Bonnen, who didn't run for re-election. And then they talked about the rules. And in the Senate, they passed a rule, for example, that said you can't come on the floor of the Senate unless you've been tested for COVID. The House said, basically, and this was the phrase they kept using, we're not requiring tests in courthouses or schoolhouses and shouldn't require it in the State House, which is a nice political line and probably makes all of the epidemiologists in America shudder a little bit. And in fact, member Joe Deschanel from Beaumont said yesterday that he had tested positive for COVID after being on the floor of the House for 3 days. So everybody who's around him kind of went, Michelle Beckley, who's a member from Dallas, sits right in front of him and tweeted this morning that she's going to self-quarantine for 10 days because, she's sitting just a few feet away from him. In fact, I think you're probably, if you jam all of these people in the building, you're going to have a real problem with this pandemic until vaccinations are widespread or treatments are more widely available.
And do they have to wear masks, or can they kind of spread around? I mean, everyone's in one building, but can they go into different offices, or how does that work? Or is the House different from the Senate?
You're supposed to wear a mask when you're in the Capitol and you're not in somebody's office or a chamber. So if you're just in there walking around, you're supposed to have a mask on. And that's going to be, I guess it's going to be up to state police, to the Department of Public Safety to enforce that. God bless them. That's going to be a difficult thing. As everybody, all the grocery store clerks already know how hard this is.
Yeah.
Some people want to wear a mask, some people don't. So that's the sort of stated rule for the building. In the Senate, you have to wear a mask unless you're at the mic. In the House, you have to wear a mask unless you're at the mic. But if you go on our website and, or any news site where they cover the Texas Legislature and look at pictures of members on the floor during these first 3 days of the session where they met this week, you see a lot of members walking around without masks on. So again, that's going to be a place where there's an enforcement problem. Inside the chambers, nobody in the DPS is going to tell a senator or a House member to put on his mask or her mask. They might ask politely, but they're not really on the floor of the House. So it's going to be members enforcing it themselves or not enforcing it themselves. In every individual office, it's up to the member. So this senator may be wear your mask, wash your hands, keep your distance. And this senator may be, hey, it's just like it was 2 years ago. And they're kind of all over the place on that.
That sounds great.
It's going to be hard to control it. So,
yeah,
if you don't have a set standard, I understand there's a million reasons not to agree on which standard to have. But if you don't have a set standard, you don't have a set protocol, and the disease will take advantage of it. It doesn't care about your rules.
Yeah. So how does that affect accessibility and people just going to the state capitol and people who want to be involved?
Right. So if you want to get in there, you want to talk to the legislators about weed or redistricting or the budget or whatever, they've only got one entrance open. So the Texas Capitol has 4 main ground floor entrances. The one you see on TV all the time is the south side with the big walk that comes off of Congress Avenue. The north side is the side that faces the University of Texas. That's the only door that's open to the public. The one on the House end of the building and the Senate end of the building, those are both closed. All of those doors the other day on opening day, I walked around on the campus. I didn't go in the building, but I walked around the grounds. And they had a couple of dozen riot gear wearing DPS officers after the riot in the U.S. Capitol and just general security. So you have to go through this one door. There's a big tent set up outside, kind of semi-permanent. It even has its own air conditioning and heating system. And that's where they're doing testing. So you get tested as you go in. They initially said you can get tested, but you don't have to. The DPS said you have to. There's some tension there with some of the members who don't think you should have to. We'll see how that goes. But there's a place to get tested, and they put a sticker on you, a different color every day. Elvia passed this test. He has a green sticker or an orange sticker or whatever. And then when you walk in the Capitol, they know you've been tested. Members and their staff can get tested in a building nearby, the Reagan office building. Same kind of a deal, but they don't have to get tested. So again, you get in the building and you don't know, except for the stickers, who's been tested and not. And you'll see people in masks and not. It's kind of all over the place.
I have one last question because we're running out of time, but so related to this, how can people get involved if they want to talk to their lawmaker, whoever represents them, about any of the things that we talked about today?
The fastest way is going to be, get on the phone and call their office because, that if they're socially distanced or not, that's a way in. You can talk to a staffer sometimes. It's hard to get the members on the phone. It's much more difficult as you get to the end of the session and you get to that berserk part that I was talking about where they're all working 18-hour days. It's hard to catch them. But if you get in there early and get their phone numbers and their contact information, whether that's email, their social media accounts, all of that kind of stuff, those are all ways to approach them and talk to them. And sometimes when you call into a legislator and say, ask the staffer, what's the best way to get my point of view across on this? They'll help you out with that. We will have, as soon as all of the details are worked out, if you go to the directory page under data on the texastribune.org, we have a listing for every member, where their office is, if you go in the Capitol, what their numbers are, if we have them, their Twitter accounts, their Facebook accounts, all that kind of stuff.
And I guess that would help also people who might have trouble because they have a disability or, they're unable to actually go to the Capitol, especially with COVID right now.
Right. Right. Yeah. If they're not going to do virtual testimony on bills. It doesn't look like at this point. I think all of this could change during the session. They might run into something and say, shoot, we need to reconsider everything. But right now, they're not going to have virtual testimony on bills and things like that. But you can submit written testimony. There are a lot of methods like that. Like I said, if you just call the office of the member or members that you're concerned with and just say, look, how do I get my foot in the door here? They'll guide you.
Cool. Well, with that, we've run out of time. So I want to thank everyone for tuning in. And I want to thank you, Ross, for joining me and talking about the Texas Legislature. And I've learned so much already with our Instagram Live. And I'm sure a lot of the people who are watching are learning a lot too. For our coverage, get the latest and most important Texas news at texastribune.org. And thank you, everybody. And I'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks, Ross.
For doing this. We'll see you.
Yeah. Bye.